So good morning, and thank you again for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to talking to you, especially during this very exciting time for people development. So at the moment, we're seeing a growing need for a highly personalized approach to people development, and that's why coaching is one of the tools or the solutions at the forefront of these discussions. So I'm looking forward to going through some of the scientific findings for the effectiveness of coaching for people development, and to really go through that in detail with you, the latest findings. My name is Rosie Evans. I'm one of the behavioural scientists at CoachHub. I myself am a positive psychologist. I also specialise in mindfulness and mental health. So over the last few years, I've been supporting organisations by delivering positive psychology and mindfulness-based interventions in their organisation, but also evaluating it. So this is a topic that's close to my heart. I'm actually speaking to you now live from my living room in Berlin. So if you do happen to hear some pitter-patter of paws, that's my dog called Cat. So please don't mind that too much. Fantastic, let's crack on. So does coaching work? This is the fundamental question that you're all here to find out today. So what is the webinar going to look like? So to start off with, we're going to go through the evolution of coaching so far. So what is the type of coaching that we are looking at today? So what is the type of coaching that we're looking into today? And then we'll go into how can we measure the effectiveness of coaching. Follow that, we'll go into the active ingredients for coaching effectiveness, so the key recipe for success. And then we'll go into the specific findings for the individuals within the coaching programs. And then, of course, the impact, the outcomes for organizations. And then the final part of the webinar will focus much more on how CoachHub measures impact, and then some of the future research that we're going to be doing with our collaborators. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end of this webinar, so there'll be about 10 minutes. So for the sake of time, please reserve your questions until the end. I will be keeping an eye on the questions box and be able to answer any of the scientific related questions for them. Okay, I myself am going to do a quick tech check to make sure that I have everything I need. Absolutely, and let's go. So what you can see in front of you now is the evolution of workplace coaching according to Grant in 2017. So in the late 90s and early 2000s, coaching had the perception of being more of a remedial tool. So it was a performance management tool, and typically if you were going to be offered coaching, you'd ask yourself the question, am I going to get fired? So as you can imagine, coaching has changed and evolved since then. In the 2000s to 2010, it became more of a focus of a tool for talent management. So being able to improve the performance of other people, but typically in the direction that leaders wanted their subordinates to go in. So this is why it's more around my boss wants me to change. So again, the autonomy there wasn't as strong as it is with the later generation, so the third generation of coaching. What we noticed was that it's not only supportive for performance management and talent management, but also talent development. So this idea of being able to really support the development of all employees in an organization, particularly leaders and high potential. So that's why the third generation of coaching, which you can see here, is defined as the leader as a coach. So this is the idea that by training the leaders to be a coach, they can have more supportive conversations with their teams, and that where therefore the coach will be the leader. So there is one more generation of coaching, fourth generation of coaching, which I'll go into a bit more detail now, because that's the focus of today. And it really comes from a number of insights that have been developed from these three schools of psychology. So we have neuroscience, positive psychology, and behavioral science. So some examples of insights from these areas. In positive psychology, which is the science of well-being, we've seen an increased amount of evidence to demonstrate the importance of looking after your employees' well-being within an organization. So one wonderful model is Martin Seligman's PERMA model. So PERMA stands for positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. So this is a model that's used within organizations today, and is something that led to the generation of the fourth generation of coaching, which is focused on coaching cultures. So about expanding the opportunities for coaching beyond the leaders to all members within an organization, and therefore having this idea that we can actually grow together, both as an individual and as an organization. And a lot of that comes from developing shared meanings and visions for the growth as a whole. So this is the fourth generation of coaching that I'd like you to keep in mind for the remainder of this webinar. So here's an opportunity for you to share your input. I'm curious to know, what generation of coaching are you currently practicing? So is it the first, second, third, or fourth? If you're not currently practicing a style of coaching in your organization, what are you hoping to implement? So I'm going to share a poll with you now. So please select one of the answers that you see on your screen. Fantastic, we're seeing some results coming in now. I'm going to give it one more minute to make sure everyone has a chance to share their feedback. Okay, so I'm going to close the poll now, and you'll see the results in front of you right now. So as you can see, majority of you are either currently practicing the third generation of coaching, so training the leaders in your organization to be a coach, or you're considering that. And the other predominant approach was this fourth generation, so the development of a coaching culture where we can grow together. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So I just found that you weren't able to see them, so I'm going to quickly share them with you now, so you can see that I wasn't merely making this up, and I'll hide the results for you there. Okay, so now we know what you're currently doing in your organization, but what is the general, but why is this approach, this combination of focusing on performance and well-being important? So what you can see in front of you now is the engagement and well-being matrix developed by Grant in 2016, and it gives you an overview of the influence of one another. So we want to have a flourishing organization, which is in the top right-hand quadrant here. So a flourishing organization not only experiences high levels of well-being, but also high levels of performance and sustainable performance as well. And what Grant found is that you can't only have flourishing organization without well-being. So if there's low well-being and high performance, you're going to have employees within your organization that are quite distressed. They may be functional, so they might be meeting some of the goals, but the risk here is that they're going to be on the road to burnout. So burnout is now defined by the World Health Organization as a workplace phenomenon. It's directly associated with workplace stress. And the problem with that is that you will move from this bottom right quadrant to the bottom left quadrant. So you will then see in about 6 months' time, low performance and low well-being. That's why it's really important to try to instill a coaching culture within your organization that is both focused on performance and well-being. So what does the coaching market look like as it is right now? So according to an ICF, so the International Coach Federation and the PwC, it's the second fastest growing industry worldwide. The current value of coaching is valued at $2.3 billion, and this is expected to increase by 7% year on year until 2022. So the reason I'm showing you this is, again, it's not just us at CoachHub saying that coaching is increasing in interest. This is a growing trend in the market. But fundamentally, we want to know, does it work? Fantastic. So in order to establish whether coaching works, you need to have a better understanding of how can you measure the effectiveness of coaching. And again, this is not as simple as it looks, because not only do you have to decide what are you going to measure, but who are you going to collect data from. So I'm going to start by introducing you into some of the active ingredients for a recipe of coaching success. And these are the measures that you should focus on. So what to measure? This is the recipe for coaching success. To make sure that you are having a high quality working alliance. So this is the strength of the coach-coachee relationship. And what that means is how bonded, how close does the coachee feel to the coach? Is this a trusting relationship? Is it a collaborative relationship? These are the qualities that we want in a high quality working alliance. And these are one of the best predictors that we have for coaching effectiveness. The next one is the coachee's self-efficacy. The self-efficacy is a really interesting concept because it's a person's belief in their ability to cope with stressful or challenging demands. So as you can imagine, this falls into many different aspects, ability to cope. So this is important for self-regulation, or for maintaining and reaching goals, and also, of course, to build resilience as well. Self-efficacy is at the beginning of all of these different outcomes. The third active ingredient is the perceived coach competency. So how well is the coach seen by the coachee to use a range of coaching techniques? So I won't go into too much detail on the perceived coach competency today, because actually there's a number of organizations, the International Coach Federation, the European Mentoring and Coaching Council. They offer some wonderful insights into what a competent coach looks like. So I'll leave it to them to explain it to you. So before we go into who to measure, I actually wanted to clarify, okay, we know what to measure, but again, how can we measure these aspects? So there's a range of wonderful questionnaires that we can use to assess these these first two active ingredients. So with a high quality working alliance, there's a very well established questionnaire called the Working Alliance Inventory, which was developed by Hovarth and Greenberg in 1986. So this is a tried and tested questionnaire and is very consistent to predict the working alliance. This is one tool that we can use. The other is the coachees, for the coachee self-efficacy, is a general self-efficacy scale developed by Schwarzer and Jerusalem in 1995. So again, another very well-established tool to effectively assess the general self-efficacy. So that's what we're going to measure and what tool we're going to use. So who are we going to collect data from? So in a coaching program, there's a number of different stakeholders that you could collect data from. The most obvious choice is the coachee themselves. Of course, then there's the coach, and then there's the line manager. The best tool that we have are these questionnaires, so these self-report measures, which are subjective, but Dehaan, Duckworth, Birch, and Jones in 2012 demonstrated that not only are self-report measures the best tool that we have to predict the effectiveness of coaching, but this is especially effective when it comes to the coachee's perception. So what they mean here is that if you're only going to look or collect data from the coachee about their perception of how well the coaching is going, that is going to be the best predictor for the overall impact of that coaching intervention. So now we've talked about who and what about when? So far the research has focused primarily at the beginning of a coaching program and how these active ingredients is really supportive to predict those overall outcomes. But actually there's not so much research out there to look at the impact of these active ingredients at different stages of the coaching intervention. So is the working alliance as effective towards the end of the coaching intervention than at the beginning? Or perhaps the coach competency is more important than the range of tools that they're using. So these are some questions that future researchers should really look into. This is the next time for you to get involved, to share your input. Which of the active ingredients do you think is the most powerful predictor of the effectiveness of coaching? So I'll repeat the three active ingredients for you again. So the first one was the working alliance, the relationship between the coach and the coachee. The second was the coachee's self-efficacy, so their belief in their ability to cope. And the third was the perceived coach competency, so whether the coachee sees the coach use a range of techniques. which of these 3 active ingredients is the most powerful predictor for the effectiveness of coaching? Please share your answer now. Oh, I think it's going to be a tie. Okay, so the results seem to be slowing down now. I'll give just a couple more seconds to finish. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share the results with you now. So what you can see is that 50% of you rated self-efficacy, so the belief in their ability to cope, as the most powerful predictor of coaching success. I can tell you that actually the 42% of you who stated the Working Alliance were the right ones here. So the Working Alliance is one of the best, is the best predictor that we have so far to measure this effectiveness. And I've got a study here done by Kasman, Schirmerich, and Shermerly that was conducted last year to give a bit more insight as to why the Working Alliance is highly correlated with the desired outcomes for coaching. So what they did here, so we're going to go through the how did they conduct this research, is they did what's called a meta-analysis. So this is a very in-depth analysis of the best quality research on the relationship between the Working Alliance and a broad range of coaching outcomes. So what you can see here are the coaching outcomes that they measured. So the coaching satisfaction, perceived effectiveness and performance capabilities, perceived learning, self-reflection and insight, and the goal attainment. So their prediction was that the Working Alliance would be positively associated with these outcomes. That's what I mean here by the hypothesis. So hypothesis, these are predictions for the outcome. The second hypothesis or prediction they had was that the Working Alliance would be negatively related to the unintended or any unintended negative effects of coaching, so any negative impact. So they wanted to look into that as well. What you can see here is an overview of the findings. So I'll start by explaining the results. So they based these findings on 27 samples of coaching processes. So this was a total of 3,356 coaching processes, so very strong sample size. And they found a moderate and consistent correlation between the Working Alliance and coaching outcomes for coachees. So you can see this range of correlation coefficients. That's the strength in the relationship between the Working Alliance and the coaching outcome that we measured. So if we take a look at the coaching satisfaction here, this was the most strongly correlated outcome, followed by the perceived effectiveness of coaching by the coachee, which we know is also a very strong predictor for the effectiveness of coaching. Then we have the effective outcome, so that's these combined. The results outcome was one of the lower ones, and then cognitive outcomes, this is the learning, the self-reflection and insights, was the weakest but still significant. So all of these were significant results. And when it comes to the unintended negative effects, there was a negative relationship, which is good. That's what we want. We don't want there to be any unintended negative effects as a result of the strong Working Alliance. This was a positive finding. So this was an overview of how the Working Alliance was evaluated. And the next slide is going to be an example of a study done within a global healthcare organization that looks beyond the Working Alliance as well. So Dehaan, Bonniwell and Gammons last year conducted what's called a near randomized control trial. So this is an RCT in a global healthcare company. So what they wanted to look at was the relationship between the coaching effectiveness and these different active ingredients of coaching and also outcomes. So what you can see on the right-hand side here is that when compared to the control group, so I forgot to mention who was being measured here. So the coachees in this global healthcare company were the female leaders. So they organized 2 groups. The first group was the target or experimental group. This was made up of 89 female leaders from this organization. And then they also had a waiting list or a control group, and this was made up of 72 female leaders. And so the waiting list, they will be going through the coaching process 8 months later. And so what you can see on the right is the comparison between the two groups in terms of coaching effectiveness, and you can see that there is a significant difference between the two. And that tells us that the coaching intervention was a success, because it wasn't only demonstrating the coaching effectiveness from the perspective of the female leaders, but there was also a strong mediation between the working alliance, self-efficacy, and effectiveness of coaching, and then some positive, significant findings in relation to the resilience of these participants and social support and well-being. So my question to you now is, does the quality of the working alliance differ between face-to-face and digital coaching? I'm going to share the poll with you again to let me know your thoughts. Okay, there we go. There was a slow start, but I can see everyone's chiming in now. Okay, so I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's share what your thoughts are. So 45% of you reported that there isn't a difference in the quality of the working alliance, the relationship between face-to-face and digital coaching. And you're absolutely right. There was a wonderful study done by Behavioural, which I'll go through in a minute. But to start off by just quickly recovering, what is digital coaching? Because this is often a point of confusion, because actually digital coaching is still a non-hierarchical developmental partnership between two parties. The only difference is that they're separated by a geographical distance. So the learning and reflection process is conducted via both analog and digital means. So that's the only real difference between digital coaching and face-to-face coaching. And Behavioural put this to the test. They compared face-to-face with distance coaching. So in this case, they were focused on coaching done via the phone, and they found that there were no significant differences in the working alliance or problem resolution between face-to-face and distance coaching. Fantastic. So well done for those of you who did say no. So we've talked so far about how to measure coaching, and you have an insight now into the different tools and metrics that we can use to do that, and some insights into the best studies that we have so far. But what impact does coaching have on individual outcomes? So the first study I want to introduce you to is another meta-analysis. So this very in-depth analysis of the best quality research conducted by Thieboom, Beersma, and Van Vianen in 2014. So their aim was to explore the effectiveness of coaching within the organizational context, and the individual outcomes they were focused on was on performance and skills, well-being, coping, work attitudes, and goal-directed self-regulation. So the definition that they used here, which really falls in line with the 4th generation of coaching that we discussed earlier, is the result-orientated systematic process in which the coach facilitates the enhancement of life experience and goal attainment in the personal and professional life of non-clinical clients. So we know that this is a study that aligns with the type of coaching that we are wanting to see more often in an organization. This is an overview of the key significant findings that they had. So we'll start on the left-hand side. This was the weakest correlation, but still significant. So coaching positively has a positive impact on the well-being and stress management of the coachee. The next was on work-related attitudes and actually professional success. And then they also found that coachees were significantly more able to achieve their goals, and as a result, they have experienced more high performance. And then finally, and this is where it relates to the performance aspect, is goal-related self-regulation. This was the strongest correlation from their findings. Okay, so this is an overview of some individual aspects. And I wanted to do a slightly deeper dive into one of these high quality studies from some studies like this. So what you've got in front of you now is what's called a systematic review. It's very similar to a meta-analysis, but rather than conducting another analysis, they are stating the findings. So Grover and Furnham in 2016, they did a review on executive, leadership, and business coaching to assess the current empirical evidence for the effectiveness of coaching and the mechanisms that underlie it. So they explored very similar individual outcomes and also made sure to measure some of these active ingredients as well. And overall, they found that coaching is an effective tool that benefits organizations. So I'll give you one specific example of how this looks. So one of the specific benefits for organizations is that there is a link between coaching and self-efficacy, as we know, and specifically when it comes to the impact of coaching on goal attainment. So one of the studies highlighted in this systematic review was O'Connor and Kavanagh's study in 2013. They predicted a significant positive increase in goal attainment at the end of the coaching intervention. And what's really interesting about their study is that they didn't just focus on measuring the 20 leaders who received 8 coaching sessions. They also evaluated the observations from 225 of their colleagues. So they included some other members in the organization as well. And to measure the self-efficacy, in this case, they used what's called a goal attainment scaling, which was developed by Spence in 2007. So overall, there was a 68% increase in goal attainment amongst these 20 leaders. So that was the self-reported measure. But what the teammates observed was actually a 6% increase in transformational leadership amongst these 20 leaders. So the way that they were able to explore this shift in transformational leadership was through the use of a 360-degree feedback using multi-factor leadership questionnaire, which was developed by Behavioural in 1995. We don't have enough time, unfortunately, to go into that much detail about transformational leadership today. So what I'm going to do is share a handout with you now, which is one of our white papers that explores transformational leadership and also how we use that as part of our coaching framework at CoachHub. So you should be able to see this white paper, and then there'll be an opportunity to download it as well. Okay. So as you can see, there's a range of different, as we're maturing when it comes to coaching research, we're able to explore more relevant, more trendy topics such as transformational leadership. One other area which I think, of course, is quite relevant to the new normal that we're finding ourselves in at the moment is the question of whether coaching is beneficial during periods of significant organizational change. That could be the shift that we're seeing right now to remote work, but this also means for cultural transformations, digital transformations, all of the above. I'm curious to know your thoughts about whether coaching is beneficial during periods of significant organizational change. So I'm launching the poll now. Please share your answer. Okay, I think I'm going to close that because it's a landslide. So 98% of you said yes, coaching is beneficial during significant organizational change. And I'll give you a couple of examples as to why that's the case. So the first piece of data that I'm going to share with you actually comes from a qualitative study. And so what you'll see is a quote from a coachee that went through a coaching program during a period of significant organizational change. So I'm going to read this for you now. The coaching, helped clarify my thoughts and aspirations into achievable outcomes, and this generated a greater sense of purpose, and my confidence has improved. I feel re-energized. By being more aware of my leadership behaviors and their impact on others and feeling more confident in my interactions with others, I have noticed stronger relationships developing between myself, my peers, and my team, and I feel much better about dealing with the current situation. So this is a really great example of the development of self-efficacy, the ability to cope with challenging situations as a result of coaching. And we also saw that in the quantitative metrics of the same study conducted by Grant in 2014. So what you can see is the overview of, again, the significant positive individual changes. So goal 1 and goal 2 relate to the goals that were part of the contracting at the beginning of the coaching process. So almost 75% of the coachees achieved their goal by the end of the program. And for goal 2, just under 50% managed to achieve that as well. But then we've got some really interesting metrics or changes that were seen in these coachees too. Ability for improvements in solutions-focused thinking, change readiness, leadership self-efficacy. So this is something, again, that's a newer area. So the ability for leaders to cope with challenging situations. And then we also saw a reduction in depression as well. So this was something, the key findings or significant ones from the study. They did have a look at changes in stress and anxiety. So there were a change in these measures, but they weren't a significant change. So that's something to be aware of as part of the study as well. So what are we looking for in the future? Again, I am personally very interested to know more about leadership self-efficacy. There are some studies that have begun to look into the impact of coaching on competency change, change readiness, and solutions-focused thinking. But again, it's not necessarily mature enough to give a confident answer. So that's something that at CoachHub we're looking into as well. And of course, the long-term impact. In the next study, you'll see why looking into the long-term impact is really important. So now we know what the individual impact is, but what about the impact for coaching for organizations as a whole? The demonstrating the value of coaching for organizations is complex because there are more indirect impacts rather than direct. So it's important to make sure that you're very clear about what you're going to measure to demonstrate the organizational outcome. So here is an overview of what to measure. On the left-hand side, you can see the desirable outcomes as defined by Avey et al. In 2011, and then also the undesirable outcomes. So this can be broken down into desirable attitudes and behaviors. So a summary of the desirable attitudes are job satisfaction, organizational commitment, psychological well-being, and then when it comes to behaviors, citizenship, so ability to build community within the organization, and high performance is of course a desired outcome. Whereas the undesirable, these are theoretically the traits that we don't want to see. So cynicism, turnover intentions, job stress and anxiety, and when it comes to behaviors, deviance and poor performance. So Avey et al. Were very interested to see whether some of the active ingredients of coaching, so self-efficacy as an example, can have a positive impact on the desirable outcomes for organizations. And the best way to explore this is through the use of psychological capital, so the development of psychological capital. So this is a recent concept that comes from positive organizational behavior, and it can be summed up through the acronym of HERO. So the 4 aspects of psychological capital are hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism. And in this study, where they looked at the desirable and undesirable outcomes, they did find a significant positive relationship between the psychological capital and the desirable outcomes. So what this tells you, especially when it comes to coaching, is that coaching is focusing, because coaching is working on developing the psychological capital of the coachee, that it's also going to demonstrate some of the desired attitudes, behaviors, and performances that you want from them as well. So one of the final things to touch on with organizational outcomes is communication quality. So naturally, coaching is a conversation, and you're learning to experience a conversation in a different way. So O'Connor and Kavanagh, who we saw earlier when they were discussing the individual outcomes for the coachees, they were interested in assessing this for the organization, to especially look at the ripple effects of coaching. So they rated the frequency and level of positivity and negativity associated with the interactions within the organization. So to sum it up, they were interested in seeing whether the coachees themselves, they perceived to have better, more positive interactions with their colleagues, and then vice versa. So the outgoing communication was the coachee's perspective, and the ingoing communication was the non-coach colleague's perspective. So what they found was that there was a statistically significant improvement in the coachee's perception of their interactions with their colleagues after the coaching, so the outgoing communication. But in this particular case, for this aspect of the study, the vice versa wasn't found to be statistically significant. And this poses a really interesting question, because this same cohort of participants rated those coachees, those 20 leaders that you might recall, as demonstrating an increase in transformational leadership policies, which naturally requires improvements in communication. So they were curious as to why this was the case, and some of the suggestions you can see on the right-hand side here is the time lag actually between the intervention and the positive impact. So they only collected this data just after the coaching program. And it was also a very short coaching program, only 16 to 20 weeks long, 8 sessions, as you might recall. And as a result, the coachee might still be learning. You don't learn, you fail forward, so to say, and it's a bit of a trial and error before they get it right. So perhaps the coachee was still going through this process. That doesn't mean that in the future, we wouldn't see this positive impact on the communication quality. Okay. So finally, one of the important aspects of coaching and organizational outcomes is how it can support you with change management. So the Human Capital Institute and the International Coach Federation in 2018, they reported that coaching is one of the most helpful activities in terms of achieving the goals of the change management initiatives. And as we know so far from the individual findings about how one of the most impactful individual outcomes that we see from coaching is goal attainment, this makes sense, because coachees are not only better able to self-regulate themselves towards their goals, but they are also able to build their self-efficacy, so their ability to be resilient towards managing and dealing with the inevitable changes throughout a change management initiative. So overall, coaching is a very useful tool to lead an agile culture. So far we've talked about the individual and the organizational outcomes from some of the best scientific studies that we have so far. What you're seeing in front of you is how at CoachHub we evaluate the return on investment, the impact of our coaching programs. So you may be familiar with the Kirkpatrick model. Phillips is a more modern addition, so they add the ROI calculation towards the end. And at CoachHub, we collect KPIs from different data sources. So we collect data from the platform itself, but we also collect organization-specific KPIs. And we do that in collaboration with our client to make sure that we can align on these measures and demonstrate these different steps. So the first step we want to look at is reaction. So on the platform, we measure the working alliance via the session rating. When it comes to learning, so this is part of self-efficacy and the cognitive outcomes that we want to see as well, we track the amount and quality of learning and activities. When it comes to application, we have a bi-weekly progress rating of the focus areas. So one thing that you'll see in the white paper that I shared with you is the overview of our coaching framework, which is what many of the focus areas is based on. So number 4 is the impact. So what is the correlation of the organization specific metric and the coaching? So this is some related to some of the studies that we saw today, that correlation, the relationship between those two, the indirect impact, and finally, the return on investment, the calculation of the financial expense versus benefit. So we calculate this in cooperation to identify the program, implementation, and time costs, as well as the cost benefits. And perhaps something of interest for you is there are some studies out there to calculate the return on investment on coaching. So Anderson in 2018 reported a variety, a range between 500 to 600% increase in the return on investment. So far it's showing quite positively, but there is a need for better quality ROI studies. And this is one of the reasons why we at CoachHub have developed this specific model to support with that whole process. So to summarize, what are the key findings that I would love you to take away with you today? The first is that the working alliance is the strongest predictor of coaching effectiveness. Then the most effective individual impact for coaching is goal attainment. We also know that coaching can develop the psychological capital of the coachee, which is of importance to organizations because it supports them with their psychological well-being. And we also see a range of desirable employee attitudes, behaviors, and performance. There is also a benefit to offering coaching during periods of significant organizational change, as it increases the self-efficacy and resilience of your coachees. And then finally, I've been able to touch on how we're able to demonstrate the return on investment of coaching. So thank you for hearing the overview of the findings so far. The only piece of future research I'd like to share with you that we're doing at CoachHub is that we have very recently, and I'm delighted to announce, invited Carsten Shermley to our science board. So he is one of the key researchers on the Working Alliance in the field. We mentioned him a couple of times today, and he is working with us. So he's part of the SRH University in Berlin to determine whether the Working Alliance can be maintained as strongly, or we can continuously and consistently measure the effects of it in digital coaching, and especially on our platform. So that's yet to come. And that's it from me. So I would like to again thank you for listening and open it up to you if you have any questions. So we have a little bit of time now, just about 5 minutes to answer any questions that you might have. If you're unsure of how to answer the questions, you should see a menu, and then one of the, there should be a tag, a little arrow pointing down that says questions. And if you click on that, there'll be an area where you can ask me a question. Okay. Aha, there we go. So I think I wasn't able to see all of the questions so clearly. So let me just expand it now. Let me just take a moment. All right. So one person's asked, how much does the coachee's expectation influence the Working Alliance? There's a great question. So as you said, a lot of what the best predictors that we have of coaching is around the subjective perception of coaching. So in answer to your question, if the coachee has the wrong expectation of what the coaching relationship is meant to be like, so many coachees might enter into a coaching relationship thinking it's more of a consultative relationship or a mentoring relationship. So you're expecting to have some advice given, when actually what we know about coaching is that it's not about offering advice, it's about helping the coachee to identify the solutions for themselves. So that is when the expectation may negatively impact the Working Alliance. So it is important. That's why having very clear onboarding to the coaching program is essential as well. And we help you with the internal communications around that if you need it. Okay. So how do I see supporting coaching evolving right now to support this isolated way for working short term? That's a great question. And one of the things I think we're learning more and more about this new normal, this remote working, is that we're having to be creative in the ways that we can build and maintain relationships digitally. So learning how or experiencing digital coaching, so the having that experience firsthand of how that can be just as powerful as a face-to-face coaching session can be very motivating when you want to keep these relationships going virtually. So that's one way that I can see it supporting that, and also just to really make sure that our communication is as clear as possible. Okay. So we have another question. So it's the final one before we close for today. And so it's a definition of digital coaching. So I'll quickly go back to the slide. But essentially, it's no different to coaching. It's in the same way that face-to-face coaching is. It's a non-hierarchical developmental relationship between two parties. The only difference is the separation of geographical distance, and that learning and reflection takes place both online, so via virtual means, but also analog, so within the context of the coachee as well. Okay. Fantastic. So I'm just doing one more check. So from what I can see, here we go. I can see one more. So I'm reading one question at the moment about whether there's any evidence concerning different approaches to coaching or schools of coaching, and which one is promoted by CoachHub. So what I can tell you is that at CoachHub, we are primarily promoting a systemic coaching approach. So this is a goal and solutions focused approach to coaching. And some other approaches that we are also more focused on are the behavioral coaching, cognitive behavioral coaching. And the reason for that is so that we can really support with the measurement and measure that more clearly and easily. And also, these approaches have some of the biggest body of evidence so far within the organizational context. So that's the reason why we do that. And I am happy to share some more findings with you, David, if you would like me to share that with you personally. Okay, so I'm afraid I'm being told that we're out of time, but that's not a problem. I really enjoyed walking you through these findings today. If you have any further questions, you can find my contact details at the final slide here, and I'm always happy to answer any of them if you so need. So thank you very much. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to speak to you soon.